The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Dodge City, Kansas, as Ethan Cole guided his weathered horse toward the livery stable. The year was 1886, and the frontier town buzzed with the energy of cattle drives and railroad commerce. Ethan, a man of 43 with graying temples and eyes that had seen too much, preferred the quiet hours before the town fully awakened. "Hi, how are you? Sorry to interrupt your story, but what I'm going to ask you is really quick, and it will really help the channel to grow and create new stories. Just click below the video image to subscribe. You'll be doing an act of kindness and encouragement to those who are just starting out. Thank you very much, and continue with your story." "Morning, Mr. Cole," called out young Mary Ann Tucker from the doorway of her father's blacksmith shop. The 7-year-old girl always greeted him with a bright smile, one of the few genuine welcomes he received in this town where his past remained a carefully guarded secret. "Morning, little miss," Ethan replied, touching the brim of his worn hat. "Your pa got you helping with the forge already?" Mary Ann giggled, her blonde curls bouncing. "Papa says I'm too small for the heavy work, but I can sort the horseshoe nails real good. Want to see?" Before Ethan could respond, Jacob Tucker emerged from the shop, his muscular frame covered in soot and sweat despite the early hour. "Mary Ann, don't go bothering Mr. Cole. He's got work to do." "She's no bother," Ethan said quietly. There was something about the child's innocence that reminded him of better times before the war had carved deep lines into his soul. Jacob nodded curtly. The blacksmith was a decent man, but like most folks in Dodge City, he kept his distance from the mysterious cowboy who drifted into town 6 months ago. Ethan understood. Trust was a luxury few could afford on the frontier. As Ethan continued toward the stable, he noticed Sheriff Henry Dalton emerging from the jailhouse, adjusting his badge with practiced precision. Dalton was a man who understood the importance of appearances. His mustache always perfectly waxed, his boots polished to a shine. Their eyes met briefly across the street, and Ethan detected the familiar wariness in the sheriff's gaze. "Cole," Dalton called out, crossing the dusty road. "Heard you broke 3 more horses for the Henderson Ranch yesterday. That's quite a reputation you're building." "Just doing honest work, Sheriff," Ethan replied, dismounting near the stable. "Course you are. Just wondering, you ever think about settling down proper? Maybe finding yourself a place in the community?" Ethan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I go where the work takes me." Dalton studied him for a moment longer before nodding. "Well, just remember, Dodge City's a peaceful town. We aim to keep it that way." The implied warning hung in the air as Dalton walked away. Ethan had heard whispers about his past, fragments of truth mixed with wild speculation. Some said he was a former Confederate soldier. Others claimed he was running from the law. The truth was more complicated and far more painful. By mid-morning, the town was in full swing. Ethan worked with a particularly stubborn Mustang in the corral behind the livery, his patient hands gradually earning the animal's trust. It was work that suited him. Horses didn't judge, didn't ask questions about scars or sleepless nights. "You've got away with them," came a warm voice from the fence. Emily Porter, the widowed innkeeper, watched him work with genuine admiration. At 36, she possessed a strength that came from surviving loss and building a life on her own terms. "Animals are honest," Ethan replied, not breaking his concentration. "They don't pretend to be something they're not." Emily smiled. "Unlike people, you mean?" "I didn't say that. You didn't have to." She paused, studying his profile. "You know, there's always a place at my table if you get tired of eating alone." Ethan finally looked at her, seeing the kindness in her brown eyes. "Appreciate the offer, Mrs. Porter. Maybe someday." As the afternoon wore on, Ethan noticed an unusual commotion near the Tucker blacksmith shop. Voices carried on the wind, Jacob's deep baritone mixed with higher, more frantic tones. Something was wrong. He secured the Mustang and walked toward the growing crowd. Jacob Tucker stood in the center, his face pale beneath the soot stains. "She was right here," Jacob was saying to Sheriff Dalton. "Playing with her dolls while I worked. I only stepped into the back room for a few minutes to get more coal." "When did you last see her?" Dalton asked, his notebook already in hand. "Maybe an hour ago. I called for her when I came back, but Jacob's voice cracked. Mary Ann, Mary Ann, where are you? The crowd murmured anxiously. Children didn't simply disappear in Dodge City, not without someone noticing. The town was small enough that everyone knew everyone else's business. Did anyone see which direction she went? Dalton called out to the assembled townspeople. Old Pete from the general store spoke up. Saw her talking to someone near the alley behind the bank, but I couldn't make out who. What time was that? Dalton pressed. Maybe 30 minutes past noon. Ethan felt a cold knot forming in his stomach. He'd been working with the horses all morning, visible to anyone who cared to look. But he knew how quickly suspicion could turn toward the outsider, the man with no roots and too many secrets. As if reading his thoughts, Franklin Hayes, a prominent businessman and town council member, stepped forward. Sheriff, seems to me we ought to be asking where everyone was around that time, especially folks who might not have established ties to the community. The implication was clear, and Ethan felt the weight of multiple gazes turning toward him. Hayes was a man who wielded influence like a weapon, his expensive suits and gold watch chain marking him as someone who mattered in Dodge City's hierarchy. Now hold on, Franklin, Emily Porter interjected, moving to stand near Ethan. There's no call for accusations without evidence. I'm not accusing anyone, Hayes replied smoothly. Just suggesting we be thorough in our questioning. Sheriff Dalton looked uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking, but Ethan could see the political calculations behind his eyes. A missing child demanded action, and the town would expect results. Mr. Cole, Dalton said formally, where were you between noon and 1 o'clock today? Breaking horses at the livery. Tom Henderson was there for part of it, checking on his animals. I'll verify that, Dalton said, making a note. But I'll need you to stay available for further questions. As the crowd began to disperse to organize search parties, Ethan caught sight of something that made his blood run cold. Near the alley where old Pete had seen Mary Ann, a small piece of blue fabric fluttered from a nail on a wooden crate. He recognized it immediately. It was from the dress Mary Ann had been wearing that morning. But what truly chilled him was the deliberate way it had been placed, as if someone wanted it to be found. This wasn't a simple case of a lost child. Someone had taken Mary Ann Tucker, and they were playing a dangerous game. As the sun began to set over Dodge City, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, Ethan made a decision that would change everything. He couldn't stand by and let an innocent child suffer while the town pointed fingers and played politics. He'd failed to protect someone precious once before. He wouldn't let it happen again. The hunt for Mary Ann Tucker was about to begin, and Ethan Cole was determined to find her before it was too late. But in a town where secrets ran deeper than the nearby Arkansas River, the truth would prove more dangerous than anyone could imagine. Dawn broke gray and somber over Dodge City, matching the mood that had settled over the town like a heavy blanket. Mary Ann Tucker had been missing for 18 hours, and despite search parties combing every building, every alley, and every hiding place within miles, there was no trace of the little girl. Ethan Cole hadn't slept. He'd spent the night riding the perimeter of town, following tracks that led nowhere and checking abandoned homesteads by moonlight. His horse was lathered with sweat, and his own clothes were dusty from crawling through brush and investigating every possible hiding spot. As he rode back into town, he noticed the crowd gathered outside the sheriff's office had grown larger. Angry voices carried on the morning air, and he could see the tension in people's faces. Fear had a way of transforming ordinary citizens into something more dangerous. "There he is," someone called out, as Ethan dismounted near the livery stable. "The drifter." Sheriff Dalton emerged from his office, his usually pristine appearance showing signs of the sleepless night. Behind him walked Franklin Hayes, whose expensive suit somehow remained immaculate despite the circumstances. "Mr. Cole," Dalton called out, "I need to speak with you." Ethan secured his horse and walked toward the sheriff, aware of the hostile eyes following his every movement. The crowd parted reluctantly, creating a narrow path filled with whispered accusations and barely contained anger. "I checked with Tom Henderson," Dalton said, his voice carrying clearly in the morning air. He confirms you were at the livery yesterday morning, but he left around 11:30. That leaves a gap in your whereabouts right around the time Mary Ann disappeared. I was working with the horses, Ethan replied calmly. Anyone could have seen me from the street. But did anyone actually see you? Franklin Hayes interjected, stepping forward with the confidence of a man accustomed to being heard. Because I've been asking around, and it seems like you might have had quite a bit of time unaccounted for. Ethan's eyes narrowed. What exactly are you suggesting, Hayes? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm stating facts. Hayes turned to address the crowd, his voice taking on the practiced cadence of a man who knew how to work an audience. We have a stranger in our town, a man with no family, no real ties to our community, a man who keeps to himself and won't talk about his past. And now, coincidentally, our children aren't safe. That's enough. Emily Porter's voice cut through the murmur of agreement from the crowd. She pushed her way forward, her face flushed with anger. Franklin Hayes, you should be ashamed of yourself. Ethan Cole has done nothing but honest work since he arrived in Dodge City. Has he, Emily? Hayes replied, his tone patronizing. How well do any of us really know him? What was he doing before he came here? Why won't he talk about his past? Jacob Tucker, his eyes red-rimmed from worry and lack of sleep, stepped forward. I don't care about his past. I just want my daughter back. His voice broke slightly. If there's even a chance, there's no chance because I didn't take her, Ethan said firmly, looking directly at Jacob. But I will find her. Big words from a man who might be responsible for her disappearance, came a voice from the crowd. It was Pete from the general store, emboldened by the mob mentality. Sheriff Dalton raised his hands for quiet. Now let's all calm down. We don't have any evidence that Mr. Cole was involved in Mary Ann's disappearance. Don't we? Hayes pulled a piece of paper from his coat pocket. I took the liberty of sending some telegrams yesterday evening. Seems our Mr. Cole has quite an interesting history. Ethan felt his stomach drop. He'd known this moment would come eventually, but not like this. Not when a child's life hung in the balance. Hayes unfolded the paper with theatrical precision. Ethan Cole, formerly Captain Ethan Cole of the Confederate Army, court-martialed in 1864 for disobeying direct orders, spent 2 years in military prison. The crowd's murmur grew louder, more hostile. Ethan stood perfectly still, his face a mask of controlled emotion. That's not the whole story, he said quietly. Then tell us the whole story, Hayes demanded. What were those orders you disobeyed? What did you do that was so terrible they locked you away? Ethan's jaw tightened. The memories were still raw after all these years. The burning plantation house, the screaming children, the order to let them burn. Some orders shouldn't be followed. How convenient, Hayes sneered. A man who thinks he's above the law, above following orders. What else might he think he's above? That's enough! Emily stepped between Hayes and Ethan, her eyes blazing. Ethan Cole saved those children from that fire, even though it meant defying his commanding officer. He spent 2 years in prison for doing the right thing, and you're trying to twist that into something evil. The crowd fell silent, surprised by Emily's passionate defense. She turned to face them all, her voice carrying clearly in the morning air. I know, because I was one of those children, she continued. My family's plantation was being used as a Confederate supply depot. When the Union forces attacked, Captain Cole's orders were to let the main house burn with everyone inside. Instead, he risked his life to get us out. My little brother, my sister, and me. He saved our lives, and the Confederate Army punished him for it. Ethan stared at Emily in shock. In all the months he'd been in Dodge City, she'd never given any indication that she knew who he was or what he'd done. You knew? He asked quietly. I've known since the day you rode into town, Emily replied. I was Emily Whitmore then, before I married Thomas Porter. You probably don't remember me, I was only 12, but I remember you. I remember your kindness, your courage. Franklin Hayes looked momentarily flustered by this revelation, but he quickly recovered. That's a touching story, Emily, but it doesn't change the facts. We have a missing child and a man with a history of violence and disobedience to authority. I have a history of protecting children, Ethan corrected, his voice steady despite the emotion churning inside him. Do you? Hayes pressed. Then where is Mary Ann Tucker? Before Ethan could respond, a commotion erupted from the direction of the bank. A young boy came running toward the crowd, his face pale with excitement and fear. "Sheriff Dalton," the boy called out. "We found something." The crowd surged toward the boy, who was holding something small in his trembling hands. As they got closer, Ethan could see it was a child's shoe, small brown leather, with a distinctive pattern of scratches on the sole. Jacob Tucker let out a strangled cry. "That's Mary Ann's shoe. Where did you find it?" "In the old mine shaft, about 2 miles north of town," the boy gasped. There's blood on it." The crowd erupted in angry shouts and accusations. Several men turned toward Ethan with violence in their eyes. "String him up!" someone shouted. "He knows where she is," called another. Sheriff Dalton drew his gun, not pointing it at anyone but making it visible. "Everyone calm down. We don't know what this means yet." But Ethan could see the doubt creeping into even Dalton's eyes. The evidence was circumstantial, but it was mounting. And in a town gripped by fear and grief, circumstantial evidence could be enough. "I'm going to have to ask you to come with me, Mr. Cole," Dalton said reluctantly. "For your own protection, as much as anything else." Ethan looked around at the hostile faces surrounding him. He could see the bloodlust building, the way fear and suspicion were transforming neighbors into a mob. If he went into that jail, he might never come out alive. And while he was locked up, Mary Ann Tucker would remain missing, possibly dying, while the real culprit remained free. "I'm sorry, Sheriff," Ethan said quietly. "I can't do that." Before anyone could react, Ethan vaulted onto his horse and spurred it toward the edge of town. Shouts erupted behind him, and he heard the sharp crack of gunfire, but the bullets went wide. As he rode hard toward the open prairie, Ethan knew there was no going back. He was now a fugitive, hunted by the very people he was trying to help. But somewhere out there, a little girl was depending on him to find the truth. The real hunt was just beginning. The abandoned mine shaft lay like a wound in the earth, its dark mouth yawning open beneath the harsh afternoon sun. Ethan Cole crouched in the brush 50 yards away, watching as Sheriff Dalton and his hastily assembled posse examined the area where Mary Ann's shoe had been found. He'd been running for 6 hours now, staying ahead of the search parties by using every trick he'd learned during the war. The irony wasn't lost on him. Once again, he was being hunted for trying to do the right thing. Through his field glasses, Ethan studied the scene below. Something was wrong. The shoe had been placed too carefully, positioned where it would be easily found. And the blood, if it was even Mary Ann's blood, looked too fresh, too bright red against the brown leather. "This is a setup," he murmured to himself, scanning the surrounding area for any sign of the real perpetrator. A twig snapped behind him, and Ethan spun around, his hand moving instinctively to his gun. But instead of a posse member, he found himself face to face with Emily Porter, her riding dress dusty from hard travel. "Don't shoot," she said quietly, raising her hands. "I'm here to help." "Emily, what are you doing here? It's dangerous." "More dangerous than letting an innocent man hang for a crime he didn't commit?" She moved closer, keeping her voice low. "I know you didn't take Mary Ann, and I think I know who did." Ethan lowered his gun but remained alert. "Who?" "Franklin Hayes." Emily's eyes were hard with certainty. "I've been asking questions around town, and some interesting things have come to light. Did you know Hayes has been having financial troubles? His business ventures haven't been as successful as he's led everyone to believe. What does that have to do with Mary Ann? Jacob Tucker owns the land where the new railroad spur is supposed to go through. It's worth a fortune, but Jacob doesn't know it yet. The railroad company has been working through intermediaries to buy up the land cheap before announcing their plans." Ethan felt the pieces clicking into place. "And Hayes is one of those intermediaries." "Exactly. But Jacob won't sell. He loves that land. It's been in his family for generations. So Hayes needs leverage." "A missing daughter would certainly provide that," Ethan said grimly. "But where's your proof?" Emily pulled a folded paper from her coat. "I found this in Hayes's office while everyone was out here looking for you. It's a contract with the railroad dated 3 days ago." He was supposed to deliver the Tucker property deed by the end of this week. Before Ethan could examine the document, the sound of approaching horses made them both freeze. Through the brush, they could see 3 riders heading their way, members of the search party, their faces grim with determination. "We need to move," Ethan whispered. They crept deeper into the brush, leading their horses quietly away from the approaching riders. As they moved, Emily continued her explanation in hushed tones. "There's more. I talked to Mrs. Henderson at the boarding house. She said Hayes has been receiving visitors late at night, rough-looking men who don't stay in town long. And yesterday morning she saw him talking to a stranger behind the bank, right around the time Mary Ann disappeared. Can she identify this stranger? Tall, thin, wearing a black coat, scar on his left cheek. She'd never seen him before." Ethan's blood ran cold. He knew that description. "Silas Crenshaw. You know him? He's a gun for hire. Used to work for plantation owners during the war tracking down runaway slaves. After the war, he turned to kidnapping and extortion." Ethan's face was grim. If Hayes hired Crenshaw, Mary Ann is in serious danger. They reached a small clearing where they could talk more freely. Emily's horse was breathing hard from the ride, and she took a moment to water it from her canteen. "There's something else," she said. "I overheard Hayes talking to Sheriff Dalton this morning. He was pushing hard for them to focus the search on you, almost like he was trying to direct attention away from other possibilities." "Dalton's not corrupt," Ethan said. "Just ambitious. He wants to solve this case quickly and cleanly, which makes him the perfect tool for Hayes to manipulate." Emily looked toward the mine shaft, where the search was still ongoing. "We need to find where they're really keeping Mary Ann." Ethan studied the contract Emily had stolen. The details were damning. Hayes stood to make a fortune if he could deliver the Tucker land to the railroad. But the contract also included a clause about resolving any ownership disputes by any means necessary. "This gives Hayes motive," Ethan said. "But we still need to find Mary Ann. If Crenshaw is involved, he won't keep her anywhere obvious. Where would you hide someone if you wanted to keep them close but out of sight?" Ethan thought for a moment, his mind working through the possibilities. "Somewhere with easy access but little traffic. Somewhere Hayes could check on the situation without arousing suspicion." "The old warehouse district," Emily said suddenly. "Hayes owns several buildings down there that he's been trying to sell. They're mostly empty, and he has legitimate reasons to visit them." It made sense. Ethan nodded slowly. "It's worth checking. But Emily, you can't come with me. If I'm wrong, if this is a trap, I won't be responsible for getting you hurt. And if you're right, you'll need someone to ride back and get help." Emily's jaw was set with determination. "Besides, I've already risked everything by helping you. I'm not backing down now." As they prepared to leave the clearing, a gunshot echoed across the prairie, followed by shouting from the direction of the mine shaft. Through his field glasses, Ethan could see the posse members pointing in their direction. "They've spotted our tracks," he said. "We need to move fast." They mounted their horses and rode hard toward Dodge City, taking a circuitous route that would bring them to the warehouse district from the east. As they rode, Ethan found himself thinking about Mary Ann Tucker, her bright smile, her innocent trust, the way she'd always greeted him with genuine warmth. He'd failed to protect children before during the war. The weight of those failures had driven him to a life of solitude, always moving, never staying long enough to form attachments that could be used against him. But Mary Ann had somehow slipped past his defenses, and now her life depended on his ability to outthink a man who had already proven himself willing to destroy an innocent child for money. As they approached the outskirts of Dodge City, Emily suddenly grabbed his arm. "Look," she whispered. In the distance, they could see a lone rider heading toward the warehouse district. Even from far away, the man's tall, thin frame and black coat were unmistakable. "Crenshaw," Ethan breathed. They were on the right track. Now they just had to hope they weren't too late. The sun was beginning to set as they reached the edge of the warehouse district, painting the sky in shades of red that reminded Ethan uncomfortably of blood. Somewhere in those empty buildings, a little girl was waiting for rescue, and somewhere behind them, an angry posse was closing in, convinced they were chasing a child killer instead of the man trying to save her. Time was running out. The warehouse district of Dodge City stood silent in the gathering dusk, its empty buildings casting long shadows across the dusty ground. Ethan Cole and Emily Porter approached cautiously, their horses' hooves muffled by the soft earth. "There," Emily whispered, pointing to a building at the end of the row. "That's one of Hayes's properties. And look, there's a horse tied behind it." Ethan studied the building through his field glasses. It was a two-story structure with boarded windows and a side door that hung slightly ajar, perfect for keeping someone hidden. "I'm going in," he said quietly. "You stay here and keep watch." "Ethan, wait." Emily caught his arm. "What if it's a trap? What if Hayes is expecting you?" "Then Mary Ann dies while I stand here debating." His voice was grim but determined. "I won't let that happen." Emily nodded, understanding the weight of his decision. "Be careful." Ethan dismounted and approached the building on foot, his gun drawn but held low. As he neared the side door, he could hear voices from inside, a man's rough tones and, faintly, a child's frightened whimper. His heart clenched. Mary Ann was alive. He eased the door open and slipped inside, finding himself in a dusty storage room filled with old crates and barrels. The voices were coming from upstairs. Moving as silently as possible, Ethan made his way to a rickety staircase and began to climb. "Told you to keep her quiet," a harsh voice was saying. Ethan recognized it as belonging to Silas Crenshaw. "I want to go home," came Mary Ann's small voice, brave despite her obvious fear. "My papa will be worried." "Your papa's got bigger things to worry about," Crenshaw replied. "Like whether he wants to see you again." Ethan reached the top of the stairs and peered around the corner. In a small room lit by a single lantern, he could see Mary Ann sitting on a wooden chair, her hands tied behind her back. She was dirty and frightened, but appeared unharmed. Crenshaw stood near a window, his back partially turned to the doorway. "Where's Hayes?" Crenshaw asked someone Ethan couldn't see. "He'll be here soon," came the reply, and Ethan's blood ran cold. It was Sheriff Dalton's voice. "About time. I don't like keeping the kid this long. Too many things can go wrong." "Everything's going according to plan," Dalton said, moving into Ethan's line of sight. "The whole town thinks Cole took her. When we find her body and his confession letter, case closed. And Tucker will sell his land? He'll be so broken by grief he'll sign anything Hayes puts in front of him." Ethan felt sick. The sheriff, the man sworn to protect the innocent, was part of the conspiracy. But there was no time for shock or anger. Mary Ann's life hung in the balance. He stepped into the doorway, his gun trained on Crenshaw. "Let her go." Both men spun around, reaching for their weapons, but Ethan was faster. "Don't," he said quietly. "I'd rather take you alive, but I'm not particular about it." "Cole," Dalton breathed, his face pale. "How did you figure it out? Wasn't hard once I started looking at who had the most to gain." Ethan kept his gun steady while reaching for the rope binding Mary Ann. "It's over, Dalton. Hayes's contract with the railroad, Crenshaw's presence in town, your convenient focus on me as the only suspect. It all adds up." "Mr. Cole." Mary Ann's face lit up with relief and hope. "I knew you'd come for me. I'm here, sweetheart. You're going to be fine." But as Ethan cut her bonds, Crenshaw made his move. The gunman dove for his weapon, rolling behind a crate as he drew. Ethan pushed Mary Ann to the floor and returned fire, the gunshots echoing loudly in the confined space. "Stay down!" he shouted to the girl. Dalton had drawn his gun as well, but he seemed hesitant to shoot, perhaps realizing how far he'd fallen from his oath to serve and protect. "It's over, Dalton," Ethan called out during a lull in the gunfire. "Even if you kill me, Emily Porter knows the truth. She has Hayes's contract with the railroad." "Emily?" Dalton's voice cracked. "She's involved in this?" "She's the one who figured it out. Right now, she's probably riding back to town to get help." But even as Ethan spoke, he heard the sound of approaching horses. Multiple riders coming fast. The posse had found them. Crenshaw heard it too. "Sounds like your rescue party, Sheriff. Time to finish this." He rose from behind the crate, gun blazing, But Ethan was ready. His shot took Crenshaw in the shoulder, spinning the man around and sending his gun flying. "Drop your weapon, Dalton," Ethan ordered, keeping his gun trained on the sheriff while moving to shield Mary Ann. Dalton looked at his gun, then at Mary Ann's frightened face, then at Ethan. Slowly, he lowered his weapon. "I never wanted it to go this far," he said quietly. "Hayes said it would be simple. Just scare Tucker into selling. No one was supposed to get hurt." "A child was terrorized," Ethan replied coldly. "That's hurt enough." The sound of boots on the stairs announced the arrival of the posse. Franklin Hayes appeared first, his face a mask of false concern. "Thank God you found her," he said, but his eyes were calculating, already working on a new story. "Sheriff, arrest this man immediately." "I don't think so," came Emily's voice from behind Hayes. She appeared on the stairs, followed by Jacob Tucker and several townspeople. "Not unless you want everyone to hear about your railroad contract." Hayes's face went white. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you?" Emily held up the contract. "Funny thing about this document, Franklin, it's dated 3 days before Mary Ann disappeared. Kind of suggests you were planning something, doesn't it?" Jacob Tucker pushed past Hayes, his face a mixture of relief and rage as he saw his daughter. "Mary Ann! Papa!" The little girl ran to her father, who swept her up in his arms, tears streaming down his face. "Are you hurt, sweetheart? Did they hurt you?" "No, Papa. Mr. Cole saved me. He's a hero, just like in the stories." The crowd murmured, looking at Ethan with new eyes. The man they'd been ready to lynch an hour ago was now revealed as the child's savior. "This is all a misunderstanding," Hayes said desperately. "I was investigating the railroad deal, trying to protect the town's interests. By hiring Silas Crenshaw." Emily held up a telegram. "I found this in your office, too. Payment authorization for special services, dated yesterday." The evidence was overwhelming. As the truth sank in, the crowd's mood shifted from confusion to anger. Hayes had manipulated them all, turned them against an innocent man while orchestrating the kidnapping of a child. "String him up!" someone shouted, but Ethan stepped forward. "No," he said firmly. "He'll face justice the right way, in a courtroom, with a proper trial." Sheriff Dalton, his career and reputation in ruins, quietly handed over his badge. "I'll testify to everything," he said. "It's the least I can do." As the crowd began to disperse, taking Hayes and Crenshaw into custody, Mary Ann Tucker looked up at Ethan with bright, trusting eyes. "Mr. Cole," she said, "will you stay in Dodge City now? Papa says heroes should stay where people need them." Ethan looked around at the faces surrounding him. Emily's warm smile, Jacob's grateful nod, even the apologetic expressions of townspeople who had been ready to condemn him hours earlier. For the first time in years, he felt something he'd almost forgotten, the possibility of belonging somewhere. "I think I might just do that, little miss," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "I think I might just do that." As the sun set over Dodge City, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple, Ethan Cole realized that sometimes the greatest courage wasn't in running away from the past, but in staying to build a future. And sometimes the testimony of one brave little girl was enough to change everything. The truth had set them all free. The end. Hello, how are you? Did you enjoy the story? Like, share, comment on which city you're watching from, and subscribe to the channel to help us continue adding new amazing videos. Thank you very much, and come back often.